Alright, so today we'll be taking an alien perspective on the question, why are old people psychologically inclined to be conservative? For more videos on political psychology, leftist politics, and autism, subscribe to Alien Perspective. Alright, so I threw up this quote because this was some dumb shit that my right-wing grandpa used to say. He actually just used, like, instead of 20 and 40, he just said young and old, but you get the point. So, many human cultures throughout history have assumed, and they continue to assume, that old people are like these wise sages, filled with valuable knowledge, and are at the peak of reason and rationality. And when it comes to, like, practical experience-based knowledge, I'm not going to argue against that, mostly because I don't care. But when it comes to politics, this video will challenge the basic assumptions of this quote. And let's just get this qualifier out of the way right now. There are a ton of explanations for why old people are conservative. I'm going to go over the ones that I think are the most interesting and important. But if you were to just take any random 70-year-old Fox News viewer, not everything that I say in this video will apply to them. Okay, so we're all familiar with the age voting demographics, right? This is the Biden column, and this is the Trump column. And you can see, this is what we're looking at right here. As age increases, the vote for Biden decreases, and as age increases, the vote for Trump increases as well. This was true in the 2016 election. Clinton, Trump. And pretty much every election that features, like, a clear distinction between the candidates, you know, there's a clear conservative or there's a clear progressive, this is how the voting breaks down. You can go back decades in America to find this. And obviously the trend of older people voting more conservative even translates in the Democratic primaries, where old people overwhelmingly voted for the non-Bernie candidate and young people overwhelmingly voted for the Bernie candidate. Now I'm going to take a guess that the two most popular explanations coming into this video, on behalf of you, the viewer, would be that old people watch TV, which is much more conservative than online media, and two, that old people have more wealth. These are both true. They're perfectly adequate explanations for why old people skew more conservative, but they each have a flaw. See, what I'm interested in is why old people are intrinsically more conservative, the psychology of it. What about back when everyone watched TV, back when everyone listened to the radio, back when everyone read the same local newspaper? Old people still skewed conservative. Now, if you want to make the more intrinsic argument with media, the best I could come up with is that, you know, media throughout human history has always been filtered through the consent of the powerful, whether it's kings or dictators or nobles or the owners of big business. Before the internet, if what you had to say challenged power, there's a pretty good chance you probably did not get a platform. Just look at how many Bernie supporters have their own political TV shows. For anyone that's listening, I'm throwing up a 0 right now. And that has always been the case in civilization. So age may grant you wisdom when it comes to practical things, but age also gives you more time to have the talking points from the powerful drilled into your head for why it's okay that the system fucks over most people. And that is intrinsic because old people live longer. What wisdom. Old people have lived longer lives. Likewise with wealth. If you're comfortable, middle class, or wealthier, the system worked for you. And humans are not particularly good at questioning systems that work out for them. Now, today we happen to live in a world where Social Security and Medicare exist. See, in my lifetime, old people poverty has always hovered around 10%, which is lower than the national average. But before Medicare existed back 60s and prior, old people poverty was 30%, if not higher. It was really bad. You can guess why. Which, by the way, can I just sidetrack here? The fact that a majority of older people vote for Republicans, it's just so baffling considering that Republicans want to destroy these anti-poverty programs that, like, help old people. And it shows you that the Winston Churchill quote from earlier about how rational and smart old conservatives are is just a bunch of... The best intrinsic argument I could come up with is who actually makes it to old age. Money buys you a longer life, always has. So perhaps the reason why old people are conservative is not because some old people's political views move right, but because we have a sample bias on who actually makes it to old age. Which gets us to our next point. Alright, so perhaps the explanation you had coming into the video was that it's not that old people become more conservative as they age, or people become more conservative, whatever. It's that people's views stay the same, and it's just society that progresses past them, right? The arc of history bends progressive. One counterpoint is that if you're a left-leaning person, your core egalitarian views should translate over time, right? So if you're in the 60s and you're a pro-civil rights, anti-racist person, at least in theory, would pick up, pro-gay, pro-trans views as they become more and more socially relevant. Because it's those core egalitarian views that are not changing over time. And that is what we observe. Like all research that I show in this video, this paper is emblematic of the research on this particular topic. The best data, according to these researchers, is in this paragraph, where we see roughly 75% exhibited stable attitudes across the 7 times we were able to analyze. So in other words, 3 out of 4 people's core political views stayed the same. However, out of the people that changed, 71% went in a rightward direction. I just wanted to make something clear. So 17.4% of people shifted conservative as they aged, and 7% shifted liberal over time. Now I know that that might not sound like much, but a 10-point conservative shift is huge. We haven't had in this country 10 points separate winner from loser in a presidential election in 40 years. The question is, why the conservative shift with age, and why is it that more conservatives don't evolve out of their conservatism as they get older? Okay, this is a new part 3. Or I'm just imagining a title card, and it's got music. In this video, we're ultimately talking about motivation. When we're talking about what motivates human behavior, I think that there is a correct starting place, and it's actually the same place that I started at in my Psychology of Transphobia video, and it's fear. So, on average, ask yourself this: what demographic is going to be most fearful for their personal safety? Because I'm imagining some physical qualities, and it's basically just a list of ways in which old people are more vulnerable. And I can't help but think that there's some primitive remnant within the human brain from when we were hunter-gatherers, like, who's most vulnerable to be picked off by the lions? And then you have to ask yourself, what political faction caters to people who fear for their personal safety? Deep down, what we're really getting at here is fear of death. And you can see death anxiety correlates with more conservative views. Not surprising. Of course, old people are going to have more death anxiety. So I picked up this quote from a Psychology Today article. Quote, research has shown that when people are given reminders of their own mortality, they feel a sense of anxiety and insecurity, which they respond to by becoming more prone to status-seeking, materialism, greed, prejudice, and aggression. They are more likely to conform to culturally accepted attitudes and to identify with their national identity or ethnic identity groups. Why are old people more conservative? You know what this tells me? That older people aren't more conservative because they're smarter and more rational, as the quote from the very beginning said. I gotta say, I do find it interesting that people become more superficial as they're reminded of their mortality, because I'd like to think that I would want to become closer and spend more time with the people I truly cared about, rather than just try to hoard as much stuff as I possibly can. I don't know. I guess that's why I gotta call my channel Alien Perspective, right? Oh, by the way, you will be unsurprised to learn that death anxiety also correlates with religiosity. Oh god. What's the source on that? I think that there's a study that came out of the University of... Yeah, no shit. Alright, chat. So, we've reached a fork in the road right here. I can go 2 directions. I can either go with option 1, which is we can talk about intelligence and cognitive abilities. And then option 2 is talking about emotions. Part of me wants to save the emotion stuff for later, because I'm still that little 5-year-old kid that saves like the best part of the meal for last. Yeah, I think we'll do that. We'll save the sex part for later. All right, let's think back to that Winston Churchill quote from the beginning. It's a bit odd to me that the demographic most affected by mental decline is being framed as being conservative because their brains work better. So even without mental decline, there's a phenomenon called the Flynn effect. Because our society is gradually becoming more and more educated, when young people are tested, the average IQ increases by about 3 points every decade. Now, I know there's problems with IQ. I know it really just measures, certain forms of intelligence, really what it measures in education. But they always grade on a curve where 100 is average. See, found the effect is about 3 points per decade. 3 points per decade increase. Here's what I found interesting. Are you ready? The average IQ in the United States in 1932, according to this scale, was 80. So why are old people conservative? This. The IQ keeps going up, and the younger people keep being more liberal. Now, the brain doesn't decline evenly. Actually, you know what? Hold on. I want to make something clear, right? So I'm not saying that every old person has a mush brain. There are old-ass liberals that have brain cells falling out of their ears, and there are old conservatives that are still sharp, right? The point of the video is to explain why, on average, old people are more conservative. All right, this right here, this is a really fascinating study where it compares people that have damage to their prefrontal cortex versus people that have brain damage elsewhere in the brain. Actually, let's look up what the prefrontal cortex does. That's staying in. This brain region has been implicated in executive functions such as planning, decision-making, working memory. By the way, having a greater working memory is associated with being more liberal. Personality expression, moderating social behavior, and controlling certain aspects of speech and language. Executive functioning relates to abilities to differentiate among conflicting thoughts, determine good and bad, better and best, same and different. Future consequences. This one really stood out to me. Future consequences of current activities. Working towards a defined goal. Prediction of outcomes. Another one that really stands out to me. Expectation based on actions. And social control, the ability to suppress urges that, if not suppressed, could lead to socially unacceptable outcomes. And as this paper lays out, people who have damage to this part of the brain are more right-wing authoritarian, all authoritarianism is right-wing, and they're more religiously fundamentalist. And nested within this is a bit about old people. Gotta scroll down to page 7. At the other end of the developmental spectrum, the structural integrity of the prefrontal cortex in older adults can be disproportionately diminished relative to other brain regions, with a decline in frontal lobe functioning. Older adults tend to be more credulous than younger adults, and older adults have been shown to be more vulnerable to deceptive advertising than young adults. Can't help but think about the deceptive political messaging that old people uncritically accept and fall for. Picture of Trump. Okay, so, yeah. This title, I'm just gonna let it speak for itself. When I found this, I thought this was hilarious. I love how they put bullshit in the title. By the way, I won't even keep this in for the full YouTube video, but take a look. So, Bernie Sanders supporters, the least impressed by bullshit statements. I thought that was kind of funny and totally predictable. All right, so this is a meta-analysis. What is it called? It's called The Association of Cognitive Ability with Right-Wing Ideological Attitudes and Prejudice, a meta-analytic review. I think that this meta-analysis put it best. As we remember that older people have on average a lower IQ and more brain decline. Quote, Individuals with lower cognitive skills are relatively ill-equipped to process complex and new social information and to understand constantly changing societal contexts. Therefore, they are more likely to stick to what is presently known and considered acceptable, rather than being open-minded and appreciating multi-dimensional perspectives. By emphasizing societal traditions, the preservation of the status quo, and strict group boundaries, ideologies endorsing resistance to change, in other words, right-wing ideologies, should be particularly appealing to those with relatively lower cognitive abilities. It's phrased this way because this is the prediction section, and this is exactly what they found. Yeah, listen, hey, anyone comment if it hasn't been made clear. Is this true for younger conservatives too? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Overall, conservatives have reduced cognitive abilities. This is a page about conservatives in general, and the fact that older people have on average lower intellectual abilities and have on average more mental decline means that they are on average less cognitively equipped. So this appeals to all conservatives, what I just read. However, it appeals more to old people and helps explain why old people on average are more conservative. This is another really good title here. So the last section was brain stuff that isn't by choice, but I don't want to frame cognitive abilities as being just nature or just nature plus the environment that you grew up in, because like a muscle, the user has to keep exercising their brain in order to keep it running well. And we know not everyone does that. Comment if you identify with this. I feel like we've all met somebody. I remember my grandma was intellectually curious about nature, about cooking, about Chinese history, Egyptian history, and she hit about 80 years old and just checked out. Totally lost any intellectual curiosity. And I think for a lot of older people, it's motivated by thinking that they just figured it all out. You know, in other words, closed-mindedness of some form. And I think that the link between closed-mindedness and being conservative is obvious. There's so many research papers that link the two. And by the way, funny enough, open-mindedness correlates with a higher degree of intelligence. Anyway, if you think, I want you to imagine right now a closed-minded person. What's their age? All right. Point proven, I hope. I got this from a paper that isn't from the one that I'm displaying on screen, but I thought it was interesting. Quote, one possibility is that open-mindedness has a positive impact on the levels of activity engagement, which may in turn facilitate the preservation of intellectual function in old age. I'm going to put in the description box all of my sources. It's the Hodson et al. 2012. So in other words, the personality trait that correlates with being more progressive also staves off intellectual decline in old age, which I thought was kind of interesting. Now, I don't want to throw my grandma totally under the bus here, but you know, she didn't lose her intellectual curiosity because she became closed-minded. For her, it was just total mental laziness. So this low-effort thought, what a lovely, politically correct, let's not offend the people who's, have these views. As this paper puts it, low-effort thought, this has got to be one of my top 5 conservative psychological attributes. And when you listen to the arguments of conservatives, I want you to keep this in mind, because you will never hear their arguments the same way again. All right, I'll sum it up like this, okay? So, I'm not saying that everyone has intellectual curiosity. Some people never had it. Some people lost it after they ended high school. Some people lost it in their 30s or when they had kids or whatever. But on average, as people get older, they do lose that intellectual curiosity. They do lose some of that open-mindedness. And some old people become more mentally lazy. And it is part of the reason why old people, as a whole, skew more conservative. Okay, new title card. All right, so you know the cliche old person that is absorbed by their regrets and I wish I could do this over again. This kind of old person has existed for as long as humans have been around, and I just think it's obvious that the existence of this kind of old person skews old people to be more conservative, because I don't know. Isn't it obvious that somebody who is obsessed with how they could do the past differently would also want society to regress to the past? You know, one thing about humans is that we're often not particularly good at handling difficult emotions. So it's not surprising that people who want to redo their personal past also want society to revert to the past. It's time to talk about change. This is what, just look at how many of these relate to change. So death anxiety, that's a form of change. System instability correlates, fearing system instability, that correlates with conservatism. Openness to new experience correlates with being more liberal. In other words, closed-mindedness, in other words, don't like change. Uncertainty, that's also a change-oriented thing. Conservatives don't like that. A need for order, structure, and closure. Fear of threat or loss. Resistance to change. The core ideology of conservatism stresses resistance to change and justification of inequality. I mentioned mental laziness as being a top 5 conservative psychological attribute. Fear of change is even higher on that list. Conservatives will take the devil they know over the possibility that things might get better every time. It's honestly baffling to me. Now, I'm not trying to say that change is inherently good or bad, but I think it's different for different age groups. See, for young people, just think in your life, right? Change is often exciting. I think about just in my life, living across the country for college, starting an exciting new career path with the YouTube channel, meeting a new lady friend. But the dominant change in old people's lives revolves around their bodies, and not in a good way. A big part of the conservative psychology is looking at the past with rose-colored glasses, so, it's not necessarily that old people long for the 1950s because of how black people and women were treated, but it's because that's when their body was in their prime, and again, we come back to people dealing with difficult emotions in emotionally incompetent ways. See, change for old people also includes the culture that's no longer focusing on them. American culture is just so youth-centric. Think about entertainment alone, how youth-centric it is. Music, sports, television shows. Entertainment really revolves around young people. Think about advertisements. Most ads feature attractive young people being happy because of some materialism thing. Now think about the ads that are aimed at old people. Take this medication for your arthritis, for your blood pressure, for your ailing heart. Take this pill so you can actually get your dick hard. More on that later. It's really important. Here, in my script, I'm like, more on that to come. It's not just that old people feel ignored by our culture, but that they're being actively reminded of their decline and their mortality. And we know from earlier, people don't react well when they're reminded of their mortality. Change also means new technology that the olds often struggle to understand. I think a lot of old people feel outdated, and that's part of the reason why they want to go back to the past. It's a past where they fit in, where they felt useful. And now the world is just too fast. God, I'm trying to imagine what a frustrating hit to the ego it must be for a lot of old people, for 5 and 6-year-olds, to explain to them how an iPad works. Now, don't get me wrong. There are old people that totally embrace this. I think about the boomers that I did Bernie activism with, and they just love that young people are smarter and smarter than they were when they were kids. Unfortunately, it seems, those old people are severely outnumbered by the insecure old people who feel inferior. I gotta tell you, feelings of inferiority are one of the biggest drivers of people to the right wing. How many Americans does the following describe? Are you ready? So they're dumb. They don't have much personality or depth of character. They don't have super exciting career. They just don't have much going on. And so they turn to white supremacy or sexism or nativism as a way to feel like, you know what, they're actually better than other people. Honestly, it's kind of sad. Damn, you have to go to a superficial characteristic to feel like you're superior. Anyway, when you listen to the right's messaging, think about just how much of it is supremacist messaging. And I personally, if we're talking about the psychology of it, I can't help but think they're overcompensating for something. All right, so this right here, this is a really fascinating bit of research that shows conservatives are less emotionally intelligent and less emotionally competent. I will do a video in the future as to what part of the brain can explain this. So subscribe for more. But for now, what I'm about to say is not true of old people intrinsically. However, in this society, the older generations are more inclined to avoid painful emotions through denial, avoiding introspection, being afraid to be vulnerable because they're afraid they'll look weak. And emotional suppression causes more activity in the amygdala. I saw in comments somebody mentioned the amygdala. The amygdala is the fear and disgust receptor in the brain, and that's like the deepest, like, reptile part of the brain, most primitive. And that part of the brain being more active correlates with conservative views. And I can't help but think that this part of the brain becomes more and more active as the more advanced thinking parts of the brain decline. All right, so everything I just said in the previous section motivates what I'm going to say in this section. So, in the past, I found it baffling that so many people in the older generations have voted to destroy all the advantages that they had, particularly the economic advantages. Like, I used to think that it was all ignorance, like they didn't know that that's what they were doing, and that the older generations just focused on whatever increased their property values, and that they were blind to the rest. And while that's true for some, I think this George Carlin clip explains it best.
A lot of these cultural crimes I've been complaining about can be blamed on the baby boomers. Something else I'm a little tired of hearing about. The baby boomers. Whiny, narcissistic, self-indulgent, with a simple philosophy. Give me it, it's mine! Give me that, it's mine!
I can't help but think about how fear of death makes people more materialistic and status-seeking.
People were given everything. Everything was handed to them. And they took it all. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And they stayed loaded for 20 years and had a free ride. But now they're staring down the barrel of middle-age burnout, and they don't like it.
And they're taking it out on us because we're a reminder that they aren't young and that society doesn't think that they're cool anymore. And boomers aren't alone. There has always been some percentage of old people who are like this.
Like it, so they've turned self-righteous, and they want to make things hard on younger people. They tell them abstain from sex, say no to drugs. As for the rock and roll, they sold that for television commercials a long time ago.
To give credit, this is from George Carlin's 1996 special, Back in Town, which is one of my 3 favorites. Listen, I really want to emphasize that feelings of inferiority and resentment and grievance and bitterness drive people to the right wing. You know, young people are smarter and better educated and have all this new tech they understand. No free college for you. Think about the insecurity of the older, less educated person taking it out on young people. I really like this tweet. I think the younger generation scares the older generation so much because we question everything they followed so blindly. You know, there are a lot of old people that see the achievements of young people and they feel threatened. They're afraid of being replaced. They're afraid of being seen as less valuable. And some of them want to punish the people that make them feel that way. You know, emotional incompetence. You know, pretty much everything I've talked about in this section and in previous ones involves a feeling of powerlessness. You know, you are powerlessness to stop old age. And sadly, many humans react to feeling powerless by wanting power over other people. You know, white supremacy, clamping down on trans rights, making life harder on young people. Part of why older people are more conservative is because they're also more authoritarian. All right, I've saved my favorite part for last. So, you know how incels and red pillars are overwhelmingly right-wing? This is because sexual insecurity has always fueled the right wing. You know, it's not surprising that the demographic most affected by erectile dysfunction is also the core of the conservative voting bloc. Let's do another George Carlin clip. All right. This is the same 1996 special. George Carlin, help explain this.
Why is it that most of the people who are against abortion are people you wouldn't want to fuck in the first place, huh?
This is one of my biggest explanations for why old people are more conservative. This is like, if I was to make a tier list out of this whole video, this would be an S-tier explanation, right? So why are old people on average more conservative? It's because the sexy young people don't want to fuck them. So of course, as with humans, some are going to react to that with feeling inferior, resentment, bitterness, insecurity, and a longing for a time when they were more desired. I don't really feel like I have to say all that much on the sex thing. I think it's like, yep, that makes sense. Here's my conclusion, okay? So, you know, part of why I wanted to make this video is that everything I discussed, it's all so human. It's all things like, these are challenges we will face when we're older. And I don't want the young people of today to make the same mental and emotional mistakes that the old conservatives of today have made. When you are presented with the challenges that come with being old, I hope that you take a path of open-mindedness, acceptance, optimism, and a desire to make the best out of the moment that you're living in. Because this moment right now is all we have. So, yeah. I think that's it. Okay, thanks, bye!